A lease is a contractual agreement where a lessee pays a fee to a lessor for the use of a property, usually for a defined period of time. The concept of a leasehold is that one party can use, control, and possess a piece of property while true ownership and its associated bundle of rights are held by a different party. While similar to rental agreements, leases are usually more long-term and well-defined, making them more stable than standard rental agreements. A lease will often give the tenant more legal rights as well. Leases do two things. First, they transfer the right of possession and use of real property from the property owner to the tenant. In contractual terms, this is known as conveyance. The second thing a lease does is that it sets the term of occupancy. These terms will include things like the amount of rent, when rent is due, and for how long. Let's look at 4 lease classifications and some examples. I'll start with what's known as an estate for years. Actually, the name may be a little misleading. An estate for years, also called a tenancy for years, is a lease that may last for any fixed period of time. It could be a month or 10 years. There are even some estates for years that are as long as 30, 50, or even 100 years. An estate for years does not automatically renew. That being the case, it doesn't require the lessor or the lessee to do anything to terminate the lease in its end. Generally speaking, an estate for years cannot be ended prior to the agreed-upon date unless both parties agree. An example of an estate for years may be something akin to a summer rental. It's a fixed period of time that is desired by both parties. The next classification is called a periodic estate, also known as a periodic tenancy or an estate from year to year. This lease type has an original lease period with a fixed length. However, unlike an estate for years, periodic estates automatically renew. A common example of this is a month-to-month apartment rental. Because it automatically renews, a tenant or landlord needs to act to terminate it. Now let's look at an estate at will, also known as tenancy at will. This lease type isn't as common, but is still important to understand. An estate at will is a typical landlord-tenant relationship, except the tenancy may be terminated by the landlord or tenant at any time. An example might be that you have a room available in your home and a family member or friend needs a place to stay for a week or maybe a month, maybe just long enough for them to find their own place. This situation would be appropriate for an estate at will. Finally, let's touch on tenancy as sufferance, also known as holdover tenancy. While not a type of lease, it is important to know about tenancy at sufferance. This occurs when a tenant stays beyond their legal tenancy without the landlord's consent. When tenants have stayed longer than they're legally allowed to, they're no longer a tenant in the normal landlord-tenant sense. In this situation, the landlord is entitled to evict the tenant and recover possession of the property, but it should be done in a timely manner. If a holdover tenant resumes paying rent and the landlord accepts the rent, the tenancy at sufferance changes to a periodic tenancy. Knowing these classifications should help you understand clients' needs and to communicate better with them, both in residential and commercial properties.